This is really what the CEO initiative is all about. We look for people and companies who are making a real commitment as part of their operating business, as part of their core business, to change the world in some positive way. And we've got some amazing examples of that. As you know, the CEO initiative work streams in our annual meetings are built around 7 core themes. Developing and training the workforce. We heard some amazing stuff about that from Michael Corbett. Technology as tool to empower. We've been talking about AI and other tools there. Financial health and inclusion. Employee and community health and well-being. Creating a diverse workplace culture, a more critical issue than ever. Building a planet-first company and focusing on long-term value. And so we're now going to highlight some of the activities and initiatives undertaken in these areas since our first meeting at the Vatican in 2016 through last year. So first I'd like to introduce the Last Mile Health co-founder and CEO, Raj Panjabi, who's going to tell us a little bit about what he's been doing.
Thanks, Cliff. My name is Raj Panjabi. I'm the CEO of Last Mile Health. It's good to be here. At that Vatican meeting a couple of years ago, a number of us were in a room talking about the global healthcare challenge. And we know that companies, including in the CEO initiative, have made some great breakthroughs in medicine. But a lot of those products and services are not reaching people at the last mile. In rural communities around the world, we know that half the world lacks access to essential medical services. And we know the challenge is that the world is experiencing one of the greatest health worker shortages in all time. About 18 million is how short the health worker, how high the gap will be. 18 million health worker shortage by 2030 if we do nothing more. So this group realized that any one company taking that on would be too challenging. So how could we work together? And we made a commitment to Pope Francis and to each one of us. And in the weeks following, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, a number of CEO initiative members joined forces with Last Mile Health, our partner Living Goods, the Audacious Project, and Gavi. And together, we decided we would co-create a vision to train community healthcare workers. So these are not physicians like myself, although more of them are needed, but actually people from villages in communities, and use online and mobile technology to empower them to go door to door to serve the health needs. So imagine Ruth Tarr, one of my colleagues in a rainforest community in Liberia, 8 hours away from the nearest clinic. Ruth would be the least likely of health workers. She has a 6th grade education. She has never been employed. But through this initiative, we've employed her, we've trained her using smartphone technology to take on the most life-saving services, from treating children for malaria, pneumonia. She goes door to door when a mother is worried that a child is sick with pneumonia, or a woman in the community needs a contraceptive. It's actually Ruth who comes to her doorstep and provides medical care on the spot. So the challenge now becomes, 190 countries have said, if we scaled up a workforce of Ruths around the world, we could save an additional 30 million lives by 2030. But the challenge becomes, how do you scale workforces? Governments alone can't do that. Business and technology have expertise in scaling and training workforces. So we created the Community Health Academy together, which is using online and mobile technology. Our partners, Living Goods, and we made a commitment over the 4 years to help 6 countries in Africa to scale up and digitally empower 50,000 community health workers like Ruth with smartphone technology that allows her to look at training videos on how to give contraceptives, how to deliver vaccines. And we made some interesting progress just in the first year with the governments of Liberia, Uganda, and Kenya, some of the poorest countries on earth. We have helped empower 12,000 community health workers, where communities have gone generations without health care. There are now 8 million people receiving health care, where community health workers have been using flip charts and markers to learn. They're now getting a YouTube-like media channel through a group called Digital Campus that allows them to see a testing video on malaria. How do you learn to do testing? How do you spot the next outbreak? And what we've seen is that it's possible now to actually move this work forward. We're going to move to Malawi, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone, work with those governments, and we're not stopping there. We're seeing results. 50% of the kids are getting treatment more so than they did before. In Uganda, 25% mortality reduction has been achieved with these workers. And we've decided to open source everything we're doing. So 6 countries, 50,000 workers is a good start, but we know that for this to scale, we've got to share our methods openly. So we've launched an online classroom on Harvard and edX, where anyone, anywhere that wants to build these types of programs to hire local people from their own villages to become community health workers can learn to do that. I'm excited to announce, Cliff, that, and I'll end with this, is that we launched the classroom last month. In just a month, people from over 165 countries have signed on. And importantly, 25% of them are actually Americans from Ohio, from Kansas, from Florida, from Tennessee, who are all working with community health workers to help patients get affordable medicines, to get food, to get transportation. So, what I've learned from this, Cliff, is that, even some of the biggest problems, illness is universal, healthcare is not. That's been true for almost all of humanity. And for business to be a force for good, for capitalism to be inclusive, it's going to start with investing in our workers, investing in our communities. And if we can do that, I think it's possible to have a world where there's no patient out of reach and no person left behind. Thanks.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Raj, that was amazing. Okay, next let's hear from the president.
Would you mind if I ask a question?
Please.
I'm Lily Cruz. I'm a non-executive from the Salesforce board, and I'm Dutch, and involved in AMREF flying doctors. And they are quite active and already decades in Africa. Are you cooperating with them? For sometimes I do have the feeling that we are active parallel, and it would be win-win when we are cooperating more.
Yeah, MREF's an incredible organization, 60 years. Well, the short answer is yes, we're collaborating with them, and Salesforce actually is also starting to get involved with their education and workforce efforts. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. So I was about to introduce the president and CEO of Hyatt, Mark Hoplamazian, who has launched an ambitious and challenging plan, frankly, to hire 10,000 unemployed and out-of-school young adults by 2025. How's that going, Mark?
It's started. Let me just say it that way. Raj, I love what you're doing, and I'm not crazy about following you, but love what you're doing, so keep it going. We launched a program called Rise High, which is a dedication to a commitment to hire 10,000 so-called opportunity youth. These are young people between 16 and 25 years old around the world who are out of school and out of work, economically disenfranchised or disconnected in some way. So why did we do this? I think first and foremost, it's a fulfillment of our purpose as a company. Our purpose is to care for people so they can be their best. And when we defined our purpose, people was specifically left to be a broad concept, not just guests that we serve in our hotels, but first and foremost our colleagues, of course our guests and customers, our owners, hotel owners, but also members of the communities in which we operate. The impetus for this particular program was really observing around the world where our own teams had turned to support their communities, and it really fell into two areas. One was education, and the second was employment. We employ a lot of people, over 125,000 people in 65 countries, and we have a large pipeline for new hotels that are being built, for which we will need to hire an additional 65,000 people over the next 5 years. So when we look at our need, we have a need for a lot more talent in a lot of communities where you've got significant gaps. And the gaps are wide and growing in virtually every place that we do business around the world. It's acute in my hometown of Chicago. I'll come back to that in a second. But we see it everywhere. We observe that talent is much more widely distributed than opportunity is. So the gap in opportunity and income and wealth and skills is really significant and creating a big gap, a big problem in a lot of societies. So we're committed to do it. We're using some virtual reality videos to help bring young people into hotels, where a lot of the people that we're trying to hire have never been inside of a hotel. We're using new assessment tools to gauge life skills. And we're using community-based organizations to help us actually find and help to train people. The difficulties are life challenges that are really real for a lot of these young people in Chicago in particular. These are young people who are the primary breadwinners in many cases. They have parents or siblings that are incarcerated who are trying to hold down multiple jobs. They are primary caregivers to younger siblings. These are the challenges that we're facing, so it's going to be hard work.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's fantastic. You know, these sharings are also opportunities for people to stand up and say, hey, I've got an idea or I've got a potential partnership for you, and to collaborate. So, so this is that opportunity to do that. So please find each other as you hear these great stories. I'm going to call on Synchrony CEO Margaret Keane to share the work that Synchrony is doing with BuildOn to empower youth through service learning. And we've got some slides here, right?
Sure. So I'm on the board of BuildOn. Synchrony is very engaged with BuildOn. And really what Jim said earlier is BuildOn is a not-for-profit in urban high schools whose really their goal is to break the cycle of poverty, illiteracy, and low expectations. It's really hard to describe the impact BuildOn has, and I'll give you some opportunity to figure that out at the end of this. But you know, it runs an intensive learning service program where the students who participate in BuildOn actually work in their communities. And it's really hard to describe how these kids rise up and become a big part of doing just incredible things in the community, whether it's giving food to the homeless on the street, working in an elder shelter, working with youth in their local community centers. It's just amazing. Their students have contributed, if you can believe it, over 3 million hours of service in the communities that they're in. And their typical high school graduation rate is basically, at best, 60%. I always ask Jim, is that really the number? But 98% of BuildOn students actually graduate, and 88% of those students actually go on to college. So this past March, a couple of us here in the room, John Seifert, Alan Murray, we were actually up in the South Bronx and participated in what we call 36 hours, which was really an immersion for you to really get to know the kids, get to know the challenges that they face, get to understand what the schools face. And I will just tell you, as someone who lives in Connecticut, Fairfield County, I support the schools in Bridgeport. It's 15, 20 minutes from where I live, and it's a different world. And so I would encourage all of you, as you think about really engaging with our youth, to think about how you can serve with BuildOn. I'm just going to give you one quick example. When I was up at Bridgeport, I guess about a year ago, there was a young man there who came from Haiti, had a family of 12, desperate poverty, wasn't doing well, joined BuildOn. His goal is to be the mayor of Bridgeport. When I met him, he had already graduated the high school. He was doing community college work, and I knew he didn't really could afford tuition. So we actually hired him as an employee. He works for Synchrony right now. We're paying for his college tuition. And the thing I'll leave you with, he came to see me the other day. He wanders around every once in a while. I came in my office. And he said to me that his entire life has been changed by Synchrony. And he said, people at my church, young people, come to me and say, I want to be like you, Ruben. So what I'm telling you is you can really have an impact, everyone in this room. And I encourage you to talk to Jim and figure out how you all can do your 36 hours. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And finally, we're going to hear from Vital Voices Global Partnership President and CEO Alyse Nelson on financial inclusion initiative called We Empower Global Challenge, which was inspired, I understand, by a conversation you had right here.
It was, absolutely. 2 years ago, right here in this room. You know, I really think that CEO Initiative is not a conference. It really is a community. And I think that was evidenced even further by what Alan said this morning with the survey results of 84% of people in this room and this community believing that companies are responsible for making the world a better place. And that's really in the vein of this partnership. So 2 years ago, sitting in this room, having lunch and a conversation with James Laurie, who is the CEO of Stanley Black & Decker, I was surprised to hear that they're one of the leading companies in terms of great places to work for millennial women. And I thought, that's intriguing. And we started chatting, and we started talking about the Millennium Development Goals. And then we started talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 targets for making the world a better place put out by the United Nations. And the World Bank had done this study saying that in order to achieve these, we actually can't have the usual partners involved. We have to go from billions of investment to trillions of investment. And that means everyone getting involved. And we started talking about this, and we thought women entrepreneurs are this great untapped potential. They're, a third of the entrepreneurs around the world, but yet we don't look at them as agents of change. And so we began brainstorming. We also brought in Salesforce and a number of other partners within the CEO initiative, and we created this We Empower Challenge. It's a global competition that searches the world for women entrepreneurs who are doing exactly that, using their businesses to drive social change and help to achieve the SDGs of improving the world, whether it be environmental change or girls' education. And that was so successful, that first competition and the training program that we launched coming out of that we're doing it again this year around the UN General Assembly, the search, the training, and it's led to incredible growth for the women who've gotten the awards as part of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Alyse. And I said finally too quickly because our real finally is Mark Smucker, the JM Smucker Company President and CEO, who's going to talk about developments about long-term value creation implemented inside Smucker and his ongoing research collaboration with the CEO I Network. Mark?
Thanks, Cliff. Just for everyone, Smucker's probably a lot of people just think of jam and jelly. Our largest business is pet food, our second largest is coffee, and then our third is food. We've been in business for 122 years, so you can imagine that thinking long-term is sort of part of our DNA, but we've been public for 60. And so, and even in the last 15, we've been probably the most visible, at least with investors in Wall Street, than we ever have. And so, as those of you who are a public company know, it is difficult sometimes to balance both the short and the long term because we all have quarterly pressures, but we also want to do the right things for the business. And as you look at some of the dynamics that we've seen lately, that it has been proven over and over again that you cannot cut your way to growth. And so it is important, and I would bring it back to one fundamental thing, and that is the importance of reinvesting in our businesses and in our communities. When we talk internally about who our constituencies are, it's consumers, customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the sixth is shareholders. And we have said since our inception, particularly since we have been public, in 1959, that if you take care of the first five, you will automatically take care of the shareholder. And so I could go on and on about, I think, some of the comments before, just all the tremendous work that are really focused on our communities and our employees, really does pay dividends. And so if we continue to reinvest in our business, make meaningful change, have the courage to do so, but also continue to invest in our communities. We are huge supporters of education and the arts. In our various locations in terms of New Orleans, we support, obviously, housing initiatives as well. And so the convergence of supporting our communities as well as supporting our businesses really does pay off for the long term. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So, yeah, let's have a hand for everybody here because this is extraordinary.